Hello, my name is April Rovero, and I'm the National Coalition Against Prescription Drug Abuse Coalition's Executive Director and also the founder. I want to welcome you to our educational interview series. We have a continuing concern about the opioid epidemic and actually under that umbrella, the overdose epidemic that we're seeing in our country. Today's interview is going to be with Paul Lella, who is the Diversion Outreach Coordinator with the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration. And we're going to be exploring multiple topics, but with a high focus on fentanyl and how fentanyl is contributing to our overdose epidemic, not just in the US, really. It's pretty much in every community at this point. And so we want everybody to really tune in and understand the dynamics of fentanyl in particular and how it's impacting our country and learn some other tips and gather some thoughts along the way. So we have two people from NCAPD's world interviewing Paul today, and that is Laura. And Laura is with the AmeriCorps Vista program. She's a Vista. And we also have Sydney, who is a youth ambassador with our program. And so I'm going to turn the interview over to Laura, and I will return for final comments at the very end of the interview. So Laura, take it away.
Thank you, April, for that introduction. And Paul, good morning. Thank you so much for being with us this morning and for giving us the opportunity to talk about the overdose epidemic in the United States. So to get started, I understand that you work for the Drug Enforcement Administration, also known as the DEA. Can you tell us, or can you explain what the DEA is, what your position and role are in the organization?
Sure. First of all, good morning, and thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to see you folks, and I appreciate your time in doing this. I think it's an important outreach effort that you do. So the DEA is, as you indicated, the Drug Enforcement Administration. And our primary goal is to enforce the drug laws of the federal government. But as a side element of our main focus of enforcing the drug laws of the federal government, but it's also, we're tasked with trying to reduce the use of illegal drugs in our country. And try to promote prevention strategies. So it's not only enforcement, but it's also treatment. We are the main federal government entity to do this. And obviously there are various, out of all the 50 states, there's state-based organizations that enforce state drug laws, but we are tasked with enforcing the federal drug laws, and we take the lead in most instances like that. My role at the DEA as the Diversion Outreach Coordinator, in a nutshell, the DEA is broken into two main functions: enforcement, meaning enforcement of the drug laws of the federal government, and then diversion. The diversion office is tasked with preventing the diversion of legal pharmaceuticals, legal controlled dangerous substances into the illegal drug market, meaning oxycodone, oxycontin, other types of legal pharmaceuticals, to prevent them from getting into the sale and distribution in the illegal drug market. We do that through the use of diversion investigators who are tasked with regulating folks who have a DEA number and have the ability to prescribe controlled dangerous substances. Doctors, dentists, pharmacists, manufacturers, and DIs or diversion investigators will go out and audit and or begin investigations of these individuals to determine whether they are in fact diverting legal pharmaceuticals into the illegal drug market. And if they are, then an enforcement action is proceeded. So again, that's how the DEA is set up: enforcement and diversion. And I work for the diversion side.
That's quite a mandate. That's a lot.
No, and we are a very large federal agency, and I think we're pretty effective in what we do.
Well, I'm sure our communities are definitely better off because of the work that you do. And I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about the community education programs offered by the DA for coalitions like ours and for school educators.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Thanks for bringing that up. So again, as I indicated, one of the main drivers of the DEA is not only to enforce the drug laws, but also to help communities and help individuals prevent prevent the misuse of drugs, and try to help in the fight against the use of both legal or the abuse of legal and illegal drugs. We offer various websites that are run by the DEA and are supported in our mission statement. The first one is Just Think Twice. That's that, again, you can just Google Just Think Twice, DEA. And that website is really geared toward middle school and high school students. It's a great resource because it gives high schoolers and middle schoolers a lot of strategies to try to prevent their use of drugs, i.e. through peer pressure, which is a huge driver, unfortunately, of drug use among high schoolers and middle schoolers. Well, if Johnny's doing it, then I must do it, or the pressure of, hey, here, try this pill, it's not going to hurt you, or something like that. So there's really great strategies, a lot of discussion on that website as to what to look for and ways to try to prevent peer pressure from initializing drug use. Another website is Campus Drug Prevention, and that's really focused toward college kids, obviously, because as we all know, drug use is quite prevalent on college campuses, and it also gives strategies strategies for college-age students to extract themselves from situations where drug use is prevalent. Talks about what the use of illegal drugs can do to someone who's still developing, and also talks about other types of resources. Another great website is Get Smart About Drugs, and this website is really geared toward parents, caregivers, and teachers to give them strategies on how to combat illegal drug use, what to look for. I mean, again, in this job that I do for the DEA, I've noticed in a lot of the work I do with coalitions, unfortunately, a lot of parents have their head in the sand. They don't want to see the common signs of drug use by their kids, or they don't know what to look for. Drug use nowadays in 2021 is a lot different than what was done in the past in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. It is a completely different world, and I think a lot of parents just aren't equipped with what to look for, how to view drug use nowadays. I mean, it's just completely changed, and I'm sure we'll get into other things that have changed, how drugs are distributed, how drug use has changed, and whatnot. So there's also other programs that the DEA runs that are really geared toward prevention. One of them is Red Ribbon Week, which is usually the last week of October. And that is a program that is rolled out through high schools and middle schoolers to give them, again, strategies on ways of reducing drug use, not even to use drugs, the dangers of drug use. And it is a great program to get kids engaged in just, not using drugs. And the last one, which I'm really proud of, is our National Take Back event, which is held twice a year, April and October. And that is a DEA-run program that really pushes the message of, if you have old medications in your medicine cabinet, get rid of them. Bring them to a collection site. There are collection sites throughout the country on that date. And today's or this year's National Take Back Day is October 23rd, 2021, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. nationally. All you have to do is go on just Google National Take Back Day, and it'll come up as to, you can plug in your zip code and that'll give you the closest collection site. Studies have shown that most users or most abusers, I should say, of opioids or any other type of prescription drug generally will start with either grandma or grandpa's, aunts, uncles, mom and dad's medicine chest. Kids or folks will go into these medicine chests, see that there's opioids or any other type of prescription drug in there, and that's, there's an open avenue of abuse. Get rid of them. It's a great way to not only prevent the abuse of drugs, but it's also a great way to dispose of them, because the worst thing you can do is flush them down the toilet, because that just absolutely harms the environment. What we do is we collect them and we burn them in incinerators throughout the country. So it's a great way. I actually run the program for the San Francisco Field Division, so I'm really proud of it. Every national take back event, we've increased numbers of collections. So it's something that I'm personally very proud of.
That's fantastic, because a lot of people don't know how to dispose of their medication. So it's just lying around in their house, or they flush them down the toilet, which, as you said, is horrible for the environment. And I really appreciate the focus of your education tools on exit strategies and just advice on what signs to look for. And Sydney actually has a few questions about how she can navigate difficult situations as a high school student, which will come up later. So if you're a high school student or a college student, please stay tuned, because you're really going to want to hear Paul's response to this.
So moving on to fentanyl. Over the past few years, we have heard a lot about fentanyl, and through our work, we have learned that fentanyl is a big contributor to the opioid epidemic in our country. It's a particularly dangerous opioid. Can you tell us what exactly fentanyl is and what impact it has had on the U.S. opioid epidemic?
Yeah, so fentanyl is a synthetic opioid. Synthetic opioid meaning that it is manufactured by man. It's not a natural occurring opioid. So it's made by a mixture of chemicals that create this opioid. It is an extremely powerful painkiller, and that's what it was developed for. Initially, it was used to quell the pain of cancer patients, where they're toward their end of life, they're suffering greatly, and fentanyl was, or is, it's currently still given to folks who are in extreme pain. But it is either, it gets into the illegal drug market because it's either diverted, kind of what the diversion division does, try to prevent the diversion of legal fentanyl into the illegal drug market, or it's manufactured by drug dealers. At least in California, the fentanyl trade is controlled by the Mexican drug cartels. Initially, probably a number of years ago, a lot of the fentanyl was just being imported across the southern border, brought in. It was being made in Mexico and then just being sent across the border. Now we've seen trends that show that the chemicals that make up fentanyl are now being imported through the southern border, and then fentanyl is then manufactured in stash houses in and around California, and then from there it's sold in the illegal drug market. So that's been a kind of a wholesale change also. It's a challenge certainly for enforcement to try to prevent the importation of these chemicals and or fentanyl. I mean, if oftentimes the DEA and Border Patrol will do enforcement actions, will locate, seize large amounts of fentanyl through one smuggling method, and then the cartels just pivot, find a new method, and still get these drugs in. Fentanyl has been particularly dangerous for the illegal drug trade because it's so powerful. Unlike heroin, And unlike other opioids, just a small amount of fentanyl can be deadly. For most people who are not opioid abusers, a small amount, I'm talking probably the size of a dime, probably even less than that, could be a fatal dose of fentanyl that will either send them to the ER as an overdose or even cause their death. So that's also been the wholesale change. Now, if we've also noticed, I mean, obviously studies in medical things have shown that if you abuse opioids, you get some tolerance to it. And this tolerance will lead to, more use of fentanyl because the folk, unfortunately, drug users are not getting that same high that they can from smaller doses. So they increase doses until it reaches to a fatal level. So another driver of fatal overdoses. But fentanyl has been a huge driver of the opioid crisis, not only in California, but in this country.
Wow. Yeah. Fentanyl just sounds like an incredibly bad player in the opioid epidemic.
Yeah, it really is. Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's a
Uh,
good legally as a legal drug. It's a great drug because it quells pain. It's a great pain reliever. But unfortunately, it's manufactured illegally and it's also diverted quite often.
yeah, especially since we know that 70% of people who consume illicit opioids, including fentanyl, they started abusing the opioids after being prescribed painkillers by a doctor.
Yeah.
So how can this cycle be broken?
That's a great question. And the DEA is an active participant in this. And I think it really boils down to, it begins with education. Education on both sides, right? Education with prescribers, with doctors, with dentists, with other regulated folks, because again, the DEA regulates all these folks that have the prescription authority. Education to them to say, hey, are there other alternatives to prescribing oxycodone, oxycontin, fentanyl, and other types of opioids for pain relief? Could the patient potentially be okay with just just take Advil or Tylenol or something like that? Does the patient need 2 weeks prescription of opioids for a minor procedure? Education begins on that end. Education also begins with the patient. Listen, a patient is a consumer. Medicine is no different than going into, a little different, obviously, but no different than going into a Best Buy to say, hey, I'm not getting good service here, I'm going to go to a competitor. So you need to go into, as a patient, eyes wide open. I always tell people, understand what the risks are of these prescriptions. Ask questions of your doctor, dentist, or other prescriber to say, hey, do I really need 3 weeks of oxycodone for just a minor toothache or something like that? As a consumer of medical and dental and other types of services, the patient also bears some burden in asking questions. So I think it really starts with education on both sides, and having an understanding of how potentially dangerous these drugs are.
What you said is really important, because a lot of people, they just trust their doctors and they defer to their authority. So they don't like to push back or ask a lot of questions. So I think that it's really important for people to know that you have the right to ask questions, because sometimes you're prescribed drugs that are superfluous when Tylenol, Advil will do the job.
So important. Yep. Yeah, it's a great point. It's a great point. Most people are kind of usually sometimes intimidated by a medical doctor or a dentist, and like, well, the doctor said I need this, so but it's okay. I personally, personally, whenever a doctor is prescribing something, I Google what is it, what's it for, do I really need this? But not everyone's like that. But I think, but again, that's education, right? If the word can get out that, hey, it's okay to ask questions about a strong opioid that's being prescribed to me. Do I really need this? Hey, maybe you do. It's okay to take opioids. That's why they're there. But also, it's also education to understand that they're highly addictive, and you have to be careful of that. So yeah.
So I want to explore the topic of addiction a little further. So you previously mentioned that tiny amounts of fentanyl can kill someone who has never been exposed to opioids before. So I want to know, by knowing of the risk of potential death, people still seek it out.
Yeah, well, that's the old that's really the old question of addiction, right? And that's that recurring cycle that's gone on for eons. Why do people continue to do something that they should know or do know that ultimately either is going to harm them or kill them? And that's just treatment. I'm a big believer in seeking out treatment. I mean, if you're addicted to a substance that is harming you, hopefully loved ones or caregivers or someone around you in your life will help you come to that understanding and intervene and help those people, because it's a disease. I mean, studies have shown that addiction is a disease that needs to be treated no differently than any other disease, whether it be cancer or whatever. It needs to be treated, and it can't just be left to be festered, because ultimately it will lead, in most cases, to the death of that person. So why people continue to use drugs when they know it's just treatment will help. I believe that. So
Yeah.
And the DEA is a partner in that. I mean, we try to through our websites, through our outreach, try to drive home the fact that you really need to seek treatment if you are addicted.
I always thought it was perplexing how people seek out these drugs because they feel that if they don't have more of it, they're going to die, when actually it's a very different, it's very different. It's if you consume this substance, you might die because it's really bad for you. So I think that it's important to frame it as a disease. It's not something logical. It's really just a sickness that needs to be treated.
It is. It truly is. Yeah. And it's devastating. I'm sure there's, everyone, has a personal story of either a family friend or a family member or someone that they know that has just been ravaged by drug abuse, and how how it just not only affects that person who's addicted, but everyone around them. And it's horrible. It really is horrible.
At NCAPDA, a lot of our work centers around naloxone distribution in the form of Narcan in the form of Narcan to reverse opioid overdose. What is your perception on Narcan distribution, and who do you think should have it on hand?
Well, I think, listen, Narcan is like a miracle drug, because it has saved so many lives, lives that would have otherwise been lost to drug overdose. And it's a great drug that needs to be in the hands of first responders, because generally they are the ones who are, coming out and trying to save these folks that have overdosed. I think civilians can also, use Narcan as long as they're trained in the use of it, because it's still, you still need to know how to use it. You can't just, oh, by the way, I have Narcan, and away we roll. So it is a great drug, and I mean, and it is a lifesaver, obviously, and I mean that sincerely. But also, you know, as most folks know how Narcan works, Narcan will revive those that have overdosed. But then what, right? So I'm also a believer in, okay, yes, Narcan's a great drug, it saves lives, but there has to be treatment then too. There has to be follow-up, because studies have shown, and I know just from my own experience, that they'll sometimes, once they're revived, they'll be like, okay, when's my next hit coming? Let's go get more heroin, or let's go get more fentanyl. You know, and it's just, it's a lifesaver, but there also has to be follow-up to it, to realize that has this person hit rock bottom? Has this person now are you ready for treatment? Because ultimately it's going to catch up to you and you know, potentially lead to the death of that individual. So again, overall, Narcan's it's a great tool in preventing drug overdose, death, but you know, there also has to be follow-up.
I want to ask about, you know, street drugs like heroin and cocaine and fake pills that are laced with fentanyl. Can you tell us how prevalent this phenomenon is and what strategies people can use to maybe protect themselves or see if a drug sample is laced with fentanyl?
Yeah, that's a great question, Laura. You know, nowadays we've seen a lot of drugs cut with fentanyl, not only be it heroin, but also a lot of counterfeit pills. And that's also a problem, certainly in Northern California and certainly, you know, within in the country, where drug dealers are pressing their own pills. For an example, Xanax or even oxycodone. They look like an oxycodone 30, they look like a Xanax pill, but they are certainly not a legitimate pharmaceutical. They're usually pressed with other types of chemicals laced with fentanyl, and these purchasers, these users have no idea that these are an absolutely deadly pill, because most drug dealers, they don't really care about their customers. They're just there to make money. It's a transaction for them. So it is a big problem. It really is. Cocaine sometimes is laced with fentanyl, and the ultimate user has no idea that they're inhaling and or snorting cocaine laced with fentanyl to a degree that will kill them. So listen, the overall strategy is don't buy anything off the street. It's just not, I mean, don't buy illegal drugs initially, but also we've seen instances of people who aren't normal drug users. They wanted to get a Xanax pill because they're stressed out over school or something like that, or they have a slight pain, and rather than go to a doctor, they'll buy an oxycodone off of a buddy who knows someone who knows someone. And ultimately, unfortunately, oftentimes these are 99% of the time they're counterfeit pills, and they are deadly. And it becomes tragic consequences as a result of that. So it's like a multi-step process. Don't use illegal drugs from the giddy-up. Don't buy counterfeit don't buy pharmaceuticals off the street, because there's a huge high likelihood that they are counterfeit and they're not real pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals should be purchased from a pharmacy only, because through that, you know that they're legitimate pharmaceuticals. You know, how you test for it. Well, I've been on a number of calls that a lot of people are stressing use of these fentanyl test strips, but they're only as good as what's being put on them to test for. And as an example, say that a user wants to test his or her heroin or cocaine to see if there's fentanyl in it. Well, a test strip, you're testing just a small portion of whatever that dose is. And if the fentanyl is not mixed uniformly through that drug, the test strip may show, oh, there's no fentanyl in it. But then the portion that the user is going to use is loaded with fentanyl. Same thing with a counterfeit drug. You break it up, crack it, break it up, and then use the test strip to test just that small portion of it. And it shows no fentanyl, but then the rest of the pill is loaded with fentanyl. So it's a start, maybe. There's really no easy way to test for it. And that's the issue. And that's what leads to the deadly consequences. So that's
Well,
the issue in a nutshell.
I suppose that's why it's called a harm reduction strategy.
Yeah.
It's not really a solution to the
It's
problem. There are definitely some drawbacks associated with, fentanyl strips, because like you said, if it's not evenly mixed, then you might not be able to determine if there is actually fentanyl in that sample. And I guess, like you said, the best strategy is to just not buy drugs from the street.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, it's easier said than done, obviously. But that's ultimately what will save everyone's lives, and hopefully get treatment to prevent people from using illegal drugs, and giving them strategies on how not to use.
Based on what we have discussed so far, it seems the potency and rise in consumption of fentanyl has really impacted public health in the US and the world. So besides fentanyl, what other substances currently pose a significant risk to US public health?
Well, certainly that runs the gamut. So, there's just, unfortunately, there's just a myriad of illegal drugs that impact the nation and society. Certainly counterfeit pills is a really big problem in this country. Also methamphetamine. Methamphetamine is a really a highly addictive, destructive drug, as most illegal drugs are. Cocaine, heroin, name the drug, and unfortunately, it's impacting the nation. And certainly, my focus is on California. In my area of responsibility, that goes from Bakersfield up in Northern California and throughout that whole area. And a lot of it is methamphetamine, counterfeit pills, and fentanyl are the major drivers of a lot of the drugs of abuse that lead to overdose deaths. All of these things are a problem. I was a district attorney on the East Coast prior to me taking this position with the DEA. And when I was there, I was the chief of our narcotics unit. And it's interesting to see the differences in the drugs that affect society and where you are in the country. In New Jersey, our biggest driver of overdose deaths and illegal drugs was heroin. It was cheap. It was easy to get. It came in large quantities. On the West Coast, we don't really see heroin all that much. I mean, it's obviously here, but it's really meth and fentanyl and other types of synthetic opioids. So it's just, you name the drug, unfortunately, it's impacting society.
Well, we have heard from publications like the New York Times that the COVID-19 pandemic and the associated lockdowns and economic recession have resulted in higher rates of substance abuse and lethal overdoses in our country. In your perspective, how has COVID-19 impacted drug abuse and misuse, and why do you think it had these effects?
Wow, yeah, great question. A sobering statistic that I heard just the other day, I was on a call, that compared to this year, they're going to report over 93,000 overdose deaths in this country, compared to the 70,000 that were back in the last year. It's just awful. I mean, think about that number of deaths that have been attributed to the abuse of drugs and the overdose. COVID has just thrown an absolute monkey wrench into the works, into the good works of treatment. COVID, as you indicated, and it was for all of the reasons that you just indicated, Laura. I mean, COVID led to lockdowns. COVID led to the shutdown of a lot of the treatment side of the medical industry, right? They're really, the medical folks are really focused on the treatment of COVID. And, you know, treatment is usually a face-to-face interacting proposition. But with COVID, that wasn't happening. People were isolated. They couldn't see their counselors. And that isolation led to depression and or use because they didn't have that support system. And of course, drug dealers are ready, willing, and able to you know, sell their poison to whoever is going to buy it. So it was all of those factors that has just led to an explosion of drug use, the reduction of drug treatment. And it needs to be addressed. We've got to get back into that cycle of treatment, of getting people back into treatment, and trying to, again, reduce the use of illegal drugs, not only through enforcement, but also through treatment. So yeah, COVID has just been awful for this country and for folks that are addicted.
Yeah, the pandemic has been really hard for everyone, but I think that it's been especially challenging for people who suffer with substance abuse because, like you said, the reduction in treatment options due to our health system just being so overworked or like overly concerned with COVID, treating COVID patients and people with symptoms and testing people. And then now with the vaccine rollout. So people have been putting off, you know, going to the doctor and seeking treatment for a variety of other conditions.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's not been kind to those that are addicted, unfortunately.
That there's a lot about fentanyl and substance abuse talk on social media, especially on TikTok, which is popular among teenagers. In fact, recently we heard about a mother who lost her son to a drug overdose, and it turned out her son was connected with a drug dealer on Snapchat to get drugs. To combat this, NCAPDA created a TikTok account to combat the misinformation and dangers on social media. Can you tell us more about how parents can educate their kids to help them stay safe online?
Yeah, Sydney, that's a great question also. Yeah, like I was saying earlier in my remarks, you know, nowadays, drugs are different, drug dealing is different. Everything has kind of changed with with the explosion of social media. That is the newest, latest, greatest, I say, way of drug dealers distributing their death and their poison to folks. And we see this a lot, unfortunately, that drug dealers either have an Insta page or Insta account, and that the kids are going on there. They're doing it through TikTok, Snapchat. So how can parents be aware? I'm a parent of 3 kids, and my wife and I, we're of the big believers in being engaged. As a parent, you need to be engaged in your kids' lives, which is not always easy, and not always the case. Know what your kids are doing online. It's okay if you have a teenager, and this is my personal opinion, And if you're paying their cell phone account or paying their cell phone bill and you've bought their cell phone, it's okay for mom and dad to go through their cell phone because you own it. But there's other ways of keeping track of your kids, seeing, just keeping an eye out of who their friends are. Have their friends, has their friend group changed? Are they exhibiting any change in their behavior? There are signs, and again, I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but go back to the DEA websites. Certainly just think twice and get smart about drugs, which give parents and kids strategies and certainly information to parents who may not be savvy on what's going on in their kids' lives, to see signs and understand what's going on and understand what the drugs are. What are what is it like? I mean, because again, some parents don't know this. Like, is Johnny high on cocaine or has he just been smoking pot? Or what are the signs of that? What does that look like? What are the physical attributes of that? So it's really important to be engaged and to understand what your kids are doing.
Also, you mentioned you're a parent, and I was wondering if you can tell us how, as a parent, you can start a conversation with teens and children that are going off to college about drug misuse or drug safety, because teenagers usually just feel invincible and it's hard to have a conversation with them. And then when you're talking about students that are off to college, they see college as the opportunity to experiment with substances. So how do you start that conversation, and what message should parents try to deliver to make sure that their children understand that there are some serious risks associated with, substance use or experimentation?
Yeah, that's a great question too, and kind of makes me step out of my role as a Diversion Outreach Coordinator for the DEA and as a parent. Again, personally, it's talking with your kids. Have a frank conversation. Understand that the world is not, as nice sometimes and as easygoing as you want to think it is. And just understand. I would always listen again, my years as a DA, I'd always tell victims, defendants, everything, eyes wide open, right? Be aware of what life has in store for you and what potentially could happen. And that's a conversation that you need to have with your kids. College is a great opportunity. High school is a great opportunity. Enjoy it. But there are dangers there, and talk about strategies on how to get out of situations where you may feel pressure to use drugs or try or experiment drugs. Again, personally experienced, all of my kids were athletes. So a lot of, we would tell our kids to say, if you're ever offered drugs, explain to the people who are offering it that, listen, I'm an athlete, I get drug tested, lacrosse, swimming, all this stuff is really important to me. And I don't want to be kicked off the team if I get drug tested and I find it. So, more power to you guys. I'm not commenting on your use, but I just can't use it, so, and hopefully that was at least just one strategy on how to get out from underneath the peer pressure. There's a lot of other things, you tell your kids that, the one time I remember I told my kids that, I've tried it before, don't like what it did to me. So therefore I'm okay, I'll just stick with beer or something like that or whatever, there are strategies you get out from under. But again, our websites offer those ways of ways to talk to your kids about drug use, and B, strategies on how to get out from those situations.
This has been a really rich discussion, and we want to once again thank you for being with us and giving us all this helpful information.
Yeah, no worries.
Before I let you go, please let me know what I can do as a high school student if I'm concerned about a friend's or peer's substance abuse.
The best thing you can do as a friend is be a friend, right? I think a conversation with your friend would be a great starting point. And then from there, determine strategies on what to do. And could those strategies be, I gotta tell their parents or their caregivers about this because I'm so concerned that this could lead to harm of them and or their death. These are situations that are personal, but again, it's that age-old question of, do you just stand by and watch your friend spiral out of control and potentially harm him or her, or do you be a friend and do something about it and get engaged in their life to say, listen, you got to do something about this. I'm concerned about you. I think it all starts with conversation and then go from there. But again, it's like a broken record. Our websites do give ideas on what to do. They give options, things that you can do to help friends, family, loved ones to deal with with addiction. So.
And asking another question as a high school student, what are some exit strategies that I can use if I ever find myself in an uncomfortable situation where I'm experiencing peer pressure to use drugs?
Yeah, well, like I said before in my earlier remarks, I mean, I can only, they're just personal experiences as a parent that with conversations that we have with our kids, but there's probably a myriad of things that you could try to extract yourselves out of situations like that, sticky situations, as we would call them with our kids, that, I really believe that if you give your children those strategies, it empowers them and gives them that ability to say, you know what, not for me. I'm good, thanks, and things like that. But I'm not saying it's easy. Being a kid, being a high school kid is not easy. Certainly would not want to redo it. But there are different ways that it can be approached, and different ways that you can try to get out from underneath that. So.
Thank you for the information, because I know that a lot of high schoolers or middle schoolers watching going to use that information, go to the websites you recommended. It's really going to help a lot of people.
I hope it does. I really do.
Yeah, dealing with peer pressure is incredibly difficult because a lot of people are just they have this cavalier attitude toward drug use, especially when you're in college and it's kind of perceived as the thing to do or like the time to experiment. For me personally, my exit strategy was always, I'm trying to get an internship with the State Department. Like, I don't need this. Also, I don't want to smell like skunk or something like that. So to wrap up the interview, Paul, I'm sorry, did I interrupt you?
No, I was just going to say that's great, Laura, because again, like I said before, there's just a myriad of things that anyone can use to try to extract yourself from that. I mean, again, what I explained was just personal things that my wife and I would tell our kids. But again, that's a great strategy also, Laura. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can get out, that you can use to try to extricate yourself from that peer pressure situation. Yeah. Listen, I highly doubt that there's situations where someone's like forcing you, no, you have to try this, you have to try this. No, I don't think it's as overt as that, but it's that, again, that sense of you want to belong, you want to try to belong. But that's you got to be armed with some ammunition to try to get yourself out of those situations. But I also think education, again, going back to education, is certainly for college kids. I mean, all you have to do is do a little research into drug use and what drugs do to a person, marijuana, cocaine, and any other type of opioid, heroin, or even synthetic opioids, and eyes wide open again. It'd be shocked. I firmly believe that most college age kids, and certainly high school kids, would be shocked to know what these drugs, how they alter your chemical makeup, how they alter your brain and things like that. So, you're right. There is this cavalier attitude, unfortunately, that it's not going to happen to me. It's going to happen to that person, But there are consequences, and folks need to know this.
In my experience, any lame excuse will do. At worst, your friends or whoever you're hanging out with are going to think that you're not cool, but who cares?
Yeah.
Right. And I love that little phrase that you keep repeating, eyes wide open. I think that we should have that on a t-shirt.
Yeah.
So to wrap up the interview, is there anything else that you would like to add, or, something that we didn't ask that you would like to provide an answer to, or a final message for our viewers?
I was just going to say, as part of my job, what I try to do is impart knowledge and understanding of the issues and the problems. I think there are the two major things. Knowledge, meaning know what's going on, understand the signs of drug abuse, understand what drugs do to someone, and then also understanding and education. Educate yourself. And again, they're kind of two of the many mission statements of the DEA. Education, educate not only prescribers, but also patients to understand the dangers and the upside and the downside of overprescribing, and the dangers of opioids, and knowledge. Be an educated consumer. Know what's going on in your kids' lives, in your own lives, in your friends' lives, in your loved ones' lives. They're the two major things.
Paul, thank you so much. I'm going to dip back in here to help close it down completely, but education is the crux of what NCAPDA does. I know you know that, having worked with us for quite a while. And so the theme throughout this entire conversation has been education. So I couldn't agree with you more about really every facet of our community, and the entire United States needs to be educated about drugs, and all of them, because now especially fentanyl is showing up in pretty much every part of our drug supply. I wanted to reflect just quickly back on your disposal program, your semi-annual take back event, and that is huge. I love that. We always participate and do everything we can to get the word out about it. But a tag on to that is how equally important it is to lock up your medication that you need, that is still in the home, because, oh gosh, we have so many little kids get a hold of pills that are just casually left out. Or I even had a friend whose dog overdosed on medications that it got a hold of. So we need to lock up our medications, get them out of sight, out of mind, and then make sure you dispose of them when you don't need them anymore. And then I also wanted to make sure that those in California especially know that there is a mandate, it is a legislative mandate for doctors and also coaches to let parents and youth know, again, education about the dangers of opioids by providing to them a CDC, developed fact sheet all about opioids and how important it is for us to get the word out about that. We actually have a program to get out to the coaches in both the schools and the club sports to educate them about that. Also, there are legal impacts. And of course, that we didn't talk about, and that's changing, evolving a lot. I really appreciate the fact that you called out the fact that substance use disorder or addiction is a disease and it needs to be treated. And in the past, there's been a heavy move to incarcerate those even low-level drug offenders who get caught. And I know there's an evolution away from that, but the bottom line is there still could, depending on who's watching this and what state you are in, there can be very severe legal consequences, including being tagged with a felony. And that, of course, is life-changing. You can't get jobs, and it can be a real problem down path for you. So just be alerted to that too. There is another good reason not to go down this path of drug usage. And then I wanted to share, I'm going to go back over to our video. I think it's so important. Let me do a share, sorry. That people know how important it is to have naloxone in any form on hand, just in case of an overdose. In particular, if you have somebody in your house that has a drug problem, or otherwise if they're just taking high dosage opioids because of a chronic problem, it's really important to have it. And then I also wanted to share just how you can get it. So all of these ways are available for anyone who wants to get Narcan, naloxone of any sort, and especially now because we still have a little issue with people not feeling real comfortable necessarily going out into the public. Naloxoneforall.org is a website people can go on to and just take a quick little training, and then they can actually get naloxone, and it may be a needle version. It could also be Narcan mailed to them. We have a lot of resources on our website. We're up on virtually all of the social media tools. As you see here, anyone who wants to contact us directly, we do have a phone number, we have our email address, and we have our website with a lot of great info. And then the DEA has tons of resources, and I thought it would be helpful to have all of these direct links to those websites and programs that you talked about, Paul.
That's great.
Yeah, because there's just so many great resources out there, and you can learn about even others that are up on our website. So thank you so much for being with us today. The information you shared, as Laura and Sydney suggested, is going to be very helpful for whoever takes the time to watch this. And I just wanted to thank Laura and Sydney too for all the work that went behind the scenes to get prepped for the interview. And I just wanted to thank everybody for being here today and for doing a great job in helping to educate our community members. So take care.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. And Laura and Sydney, you guys did a fantastic job. You really did. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you, Laura, for leading the interview.